Welcome, everybody, to this afternoon's edition of Samoa Live. Today, we have a very special program for you. It's like my Hanukkah present for this year that these wonderful people have agreed to join us on Samoa Live and speak about the art of the Steele, how author illustrators look to other illustrators for inspiration. So we have K-Fai Steele, Rowboat Watkins, and Doug Salati here, and moderating the conversation today is the one, the only, Susannah Richards. So I am going to bring everybody on the screen because we only have an hour. I will let them introduce themselves, and I will just say an enormous, genuine, huge, heartfelt thank you to all four of them for joining us tonight. Okay, here we go. We got Doug plus Rowboat because Doug was sitting next to Rowboat moments ago, but instead you just get Ruby, Susannah, K-Fai, and Doug. And I will leave you all to it. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be here, and happy Hanukkah, and happy Hanukkah to everybody. I'm so excited to see Ruby. I don't know, I might be a little more excited to see Ruby than any of the three of you, not really. So this is a delight. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Steele, but what we're really going to talk about, I hope, is how the children's book and artists of the past may have influenced you. And I'm so delighted that we have you, even though Doug and Rowboat are actually in the same place, not too far apart, but we definitely have K-Fai from across the pond and all the way in Switzerland, and I'm totally excited about this. We have three contemporary children's book creators who believe that their work is influence and an extension, and their love of children's books and children's art of the past is something that is important. So what I'm going to ask is that each of you give yourself a little quick introduction and we'll talk. And do not, under any circumstances, fail to hold up maybe a work in progress, a recently published book, or a current book if you'd like that. So we're going to start with K-Fai because she is the farthest away from where we are now, coming to you from New York, Connecticut, and Switzerland. And I am delighted to see you. I just wish you were a little bit closer to us, but I can't wait to hear about your adventures.
Yeah, I mean, does it matter if we're close? Even if we're close, though I know that Doug and Rowboat are like a cat's. I guess a dog's jump away from each other, literally. My name is K-Fai Steele. I write and illustrate picture books. This is a book that I just published. It's called All Eyes on Ozzy. It's about attention and wanting attention, and also about. I was talking to. It's hard to summarize, in a one sentence what a book is about. But I think like the takeaway I'm kind of seeing surface as I'm sharing this with more kids is like, listen, sometimes it's all about you, and other times it's like definitely not about you, but sometimes it's definitely about you. So I feel like that's kind of like that thing. And the thing that I'm currently working on, I thought I would do something brave and talk about something I haven't sold yet or haven't even written, but it's actually about this character right here. I'll bring this baby a little closer. So this is actually this is my baby, kind of based on that. But I was playing a drawing game with a friend, and I just kept on drawing this baby over and over again. And I had a baby a year ago, and I just love seeing like all of these emotions that this baby has, and it's just like an endless source of fascination. So I'm playing with something right now. Who knows if it's going to turn into anything, but yeah, that's what I'm working on right now.
Super, super exciting. I'm a little bit jealous because right before the pandemic started, K-Fai was actually in my neighborhood, the University of Connecticut, where she was studying the work and the archives that are housed at the University of Connecticut, the Northeast Children's Literature Collection, what we call NICL, which is literally 1.5 miles from my house. And I live halfway between that archive, which Doug has spent some time with as well, because it is the home of works of Maurice Sendak, Trina Sharp-Hyman, Richard Scarry, Edward Young, and many other people past, present, and future. And so I'm hoping that post-pandemic, we all get to meet at one of the many places where we can study children's books. And I think, K-Fai, when you were here, you were spending a lot of time looking at the James Marshall papers, weren't you? And so I can honestly say that I live in my house because of James Marshall. I almost bought the house next, or 2 houses over from him, but instead I bought my house. So I feel like there are lots of things. So this is totally delight. So I think then we're going to next go to, this is an interesting thing. I don't really remember whether I met Doug or Rowboat in person first. So we're going to actually go to Doug next. We're going to go to Doug next. And Doug, tell us a little bit about you, what you've been working on, and what you...
Yeah. Great. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I just kind of finished working on, and it's hopefully to print, being printed. This is a cover for the first book that I've written and illustrated. It's called Hot Dog, and it's this idea that I had done sketches for a long time ago from the experience of going to the beach, going from New York to the beach and Fire Island. And I met a dog out there that just seemed to be loving its life. And I did some sketches like 7 years ago, and I had a bit of a lull between my first couple projects as a book illustrator, and needed something to keep me going and to keep working on. So I picked that up, and lucky for me, it's becoming an actual book.
That's so exciting. And as Doug said, this is the first book he's written and illustrated himself. He's also illustrated a book by the late, great Tommy DePaula, as well as a book with his friend and partner, Matthew Farina, which I totally love, and other things. And this book is edited by Rotem Moskovich, right, for Knopf?
Hot Dog, yep. Exactly.
Yep. So we're kind of excited about that. So that's all tying. And Doug has a little bit of a Yukon connection, because Doug has spent some time working with the Sendak Foundation and is quite familiar with the archives and works of the late, great Maurice Sendak, which much of which is also located at the University of Connecticut. I live in the shadows of great children's book illustrators. And now we're gonna go to Rowboat, and I'm super excited about that. I will admit that I've had the opportunity to spend time in museums with both Rowboat and Rob and Doug, and it's so exciting to go to a museum with an artist. A little bit overwhelming, but really super exciting. So Rowboat, tell us a little bit about your last book and what you're working on right now.
Well, my last book is supposed to come out, I think, in November, but I think because of port issues and shipping issues, it was delayed. It's coming out in February. It's a very funny text by Sally Lloyd-Jones. It's the first book I've worked on with Ann Schwartz. And they were both super fun to work with. So this is coming out in February. It's about a very small king, maybe loosely based on a recent president of this country. And then I'm also working on a book called The Go-Go Guys for Chronicle, which I've been working on for a long time. This is actually an earlier dummy. I don't have a printout of the current one.
It's a really good title.
It is.
Thank you. It's a rhyming book about these hyperactive kids who can't get to sleep. And much like K-Fai, I keep a sketchbook, and I know I was watching your presentation of Ozzy to the SF school district the other day through the library, and you were showing how characters reappear in your sketchbook, and that sometimes you realize that that's kind of the source of a story. So I've been trying to do something with this pencil character that keeps appearing in I don't know where the camera is.
You're doing fine.
And So I am trying to figure out a story to go with this pencil character.
I love it. And who's
so
on your lap? You know, some people
this
might want to
is
know.
so this is Ruby. She comes to the studio occasionally. She and Doug have a very complicated emotional relationship. Yeah, so she's here actually because nobody else is at home today, so she's here.
Cool.
I don't think she has any idea what's going on, which makes two of us.
I kind of just love it. I'd like to be with any of you right now. Although K-Fai, you're kind of like in the lead here because the whole idea of being Switzerland sounds really appealing right now. Although I love the studio. And remind me, Doug and Rowboat, who do you share studio with? Just in case people don't know.
Oh, well, we're very, very fortunate to share space with Brian Floca and Sophie Blackhall. And I'm using Sophie's laptop right now very kindly. She saved the day for me. Yeah, so that, oh, look. Rowboat is giving us a little sneak peek. So,
ooh, they're both there. They're being awfully quiet.
Yeah, they're serious, very serious, busy people, lots to do. Yeah, so as you can imagine, it's a pretty wonderful space to be in.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, so let's get down to the business here.
Oh.
You know, there's just so much to talk about. And I've been thinking a lot about this, and I think a lot of artists think about this as well. You know, what is that line between stealing and recreating? And how does what we put in our visual memories, how does it influence what we create, both as writers and illustrators? I'm saying we as if I can do either of those things, which is totally not true. But I often think about this idea that so much of what we see in children's books today, is it original or is it a tribute to the past and other things? So here's my question for you. And as always, there are no rules. Any of you or none of you can answer it. And if my question is so lame that none of you answers it, we'll move on to another question. What do you think the role is of studying picture books of the past to make books of the present in the future? And I know that each of you has people that he or she has looked at in the past, and maybe you'd throw in a few of the names of those people that you think everyone should study and look at. So what do you think of the role of looking at books, whether it's books at the beginning of the century, and they may not always be books that were originally intended for children and young adult audiences. They may be other books.
If you're ready, K-Fi, feel free.
I can kick us off. Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, there's so much to talk about.
Yeah.
I think one thing that is interesting, so there's a difference between looking at archives, right? And then looking at finished picture books. And, you know, I always say if I'm doing a school visit, this always makes librarians really happy, but it's also true. I say that if you want to become a writer or an illustrator, you have to be a really good reader, because you know, how else are you going to know the medium that you're working with? And I think there's also this myth that to be a creative person, you have to be inspired by a muse, and you're like this kind of brilliant genius that like works on your own, never talks to other people, and you just kind of make things from like whatever you have because you're special or whatever. And that's obvious. I really think that's terrible, and I think it's not true. Maybe it's true for some people, definitely not for me. I think I would never have made a book if I never talked to anyone, you know, because why would I? Or like my ideas come from talking to other people or being inspired by other people. But what I think is interesting, so that's one thing. And the other thing that that came to my mind as you were saying this stuff was looking at archives is so special, because when you see a finished book like on the shelf, you're just seeing like the finished thing that editors have touched and art directors have touched. And what's so fascinating about going into archives and looking at things is you get to see the first version, or like the sketchbooks, or oftentimes if you see manuscripts, you see the actual editing process, like what got taken out, how did the final thing differ from the original thing? And then if you're very lucky, you get to go into an archive, you can see someone's entire body of work. And you can kind of see how their stuff gets edited over time, how their style changes over time. And what's so important and special and interesting, I think, to me about that is that, it's really like an education, and it's a way to learn something. And I think that there's also another myth, like to learn something, to become a professional, you have to go to college and you have to get an expensive art degree and all this stuff. And I think that's not true. I think you can, especially with like children's books, you can do things like go to archives and learn from people like that. It's great to look at people's finished books. It's more interesting for me to see how they struggled with the process of writing and editing and coming up with ideas and things like that.
I think that's so great what you said about this archive. And I don't think everybody realizes how many amazing archives there are, not only in the United States, but around the world. And whether it's the Northeast Children's Literature Collection at the University of Connecticut, or the Curlin at the University of Minnesota, or the Beinecke at Yale, or the Kotzen at Princeton, as well as other places that have taken a very serious interest in archiving and making sure that you can see process as well as final bound work. And then on top of that, we have institutions such as, in Texas and Ohio and Massachusetts that are museums that like to put on shows where they show a book from the beginning, whether it's the Eric Carle Museum of Picture Book Art or the Mazza Gallery, or the Mazza, or other places like that. So the truth is, and also I really should not forget the de Grumman. Big nod out to the de Grumman, and of course the archive for the Ezra Jack Keats, which I know some of our participants have been very involved and recognized by the Ezra Jack Keats Foundation. So Doug and/or Rowboat, what's your response to the question that you probably don't even remember anymore?
I just wanted to kind of just add to what K-Fai was saying about the idea of making books or becoming an illustrator, or wanting to become an illustrator, and the resources available. And yeah, I think it was for me. I guess I should just speak to that. But I remember, I went through the traditional college path, and I remember thinking like, oh, this is, I have to get this degree and I have to study this thing to be able to do this job when I come out, and I think as I've gotten to meet a lot of illustrators and writers in the picture book world, and then studying obviously people that we all love, bookmakers from the past, that it's not necessarily the case, right? And those archives, which are, if you know where they are and you know what's there, they are a tremendous resource in terms of kind of either if you are in a program, just adding another enrichment to your study and kind of just expanding maybe what you already know in terms of bookmaking. So I think as that's one thing. And then I was just thinking about how with the Sendak Foundation, Maurice Sendak Foundation, and the archives there, and maybe we can get back to this or expand on it later. I'm just throwing it out there. But the idea of kind of, I think one of my biggest takeaways is that Maurice looking at other bookmakers from the past, but then kind of how he really went beyond the picture book format in terms of what he was kind of drawn to, and then taking in, and then digesting, and then incorporating into his work. So I don't know, maybe we can get back to that a little later.
I think there's so much to talk about in Rowboat. My memory is you were a Sendak fellow, weren't you?
I was. I don't have a lot of experience going to archives, but I will say that other than getting to meet Maurice and visit his home and to have him come by and look at our work, was looking at his sketchbooks and at all the early iterations of his books, and seeing the process and how he arrived at the things that we see as the finished books. I have a weird echo going on because I can hear myself coming off of Doug or something. What was I saying? It was, yeah, so it was great to be there and looking at original material. And I think, for me, one of the things that was helpful is just to see how messy the process can be in the beginning. That there's, my tendency is to just kind of tighten up, and you sort of feel like things are going to come to you in this kind of whole cloth way, and that you need to sort of know what you're doing before you start, and that if you're waiting for that kind of period where you know enough to start, you're just I'm never going to start. And seeing early versions of people's work or sharing a space with other picture book makers, you just see how much the process involves not knowing and just starting, and that the place that you start that may be totally unrelated to where you wind up going is just the necessary first step towards whatever that journey is going to be, to figuring out what your book or your story or your pictures are going to be. That I remember seeing the art of Babar at the Morgan a few years ago, and just looking at how messy the final art was for that book. And it was like this weird kind of like, I don't know, epiphany to see, like final art could look that messy. And the art is kind of messy, right? Even as a printed book, but seeing the tape and seeing how tracing paper was just taped on some other piece of paper, or looking at the Tommy Unger kind of dummies in Maurice's archives, or some of the James Marshall stuff, or some John Agee stuff, like seeing the kind of just the constructedness and the kind of the behind the scenes messiness of the work is really, if I had known that when I was starting out, that you can really be kind of confused and a mess, and you can still come up with something that is a workable book. That I think that we're so used to seeing the books as like finished things, so that they seem like they've always been what they are, but you don't see all the hundreds of things that they could have been or were, before the thing that we're all consuming in the end.
Oh my gosh, there's so much to expand on. This whole idea, like I'm obsessed on transparent tape on so many of the original illustrations, and what books look like when they were separated, what the separations look like. But I want to correct myself and say that when we're talking about this idea of thinking and studying those of the past, we're not just talking about archives. We're talking about going to museums. We're talking about exhibits. We're talking about studying what other people around us might be doing or what they've looked at. And I'm kind of curious, if there are particular authors, particular illustrators, adult and or those who created books for children, or maybe like Benny Montessori, people who did both, or Tommy Unger and other people. Who are your people? Like, who are your people who you could pour over their work over and over again? And maybe it's one title, or maybe it's their range of titles. That person that is in my life, when I find a free or a really cheap copy, no matter how beat up it is, it's like I have to have it. I have to have it. Oh my gosh. So
I mean, I think James Marshall is, he blows me away. When I get confused, I've made Doug sit down and look at James Marshall books with me many times. We looked at lots of books together, but I'm always amazed at how simple he makes it seem, that there's so few elements. I was talking about this with Sophie earlier this morning, just that, I struggle against this kind of the more information starts. I feel like there needs to be more stuff that goes into the pictures, and they start to get kind of busy and heavy. And I was looking at K-Fai's book last night, just like how open so many of those illustrations are. Like, it seems so effortless, but it's like so hard to just pare away everything so that you just have just those essential things in the picture. And Marshall is just so great at having just like 6 or 7 or 5 or 4 things in there, and they're all perfectly arranged, and they look so dopey, but they're exquisitely composed pictures. They're just, his work just constantly delights me.
That just makes my heart skip like 3 beats.
I would also say probably James Marshall for me too, but for a different reason. In that, when his books have a good ending, the ending is so good. Like it's just a really tight, inevitable ending, and it's one of the, you know, like Miss Nelson is missing. I guess this is written by Harry Allard, or you know, so it's not, you know, James Marshall, but also like Bumps in the Night. Maybe that was even Harry Allard too. So maybe it's Harry Allard is the person who I'm really into. But yeah, it's just those endings where you're like, you know, it's the only ending that this book could have had, and I didn't see it coming. But it's almost like a I don't know. It's like a really good TV show where you're just like, oh, I'm so jealous and so excited about how tight and good this ending is. And it's rare, right? That you can like, that's the thing that I look at. Yeah. So James Marshall would be the person for me.
But they're also so subtle too, right? I mean, it's not like they're not like the pictures are so jokey, but the stories are not. There's like this weird, subtle kind of just soft. He's not. I don't know. I don't know how to describe it, but there's just, you know, they're just gentle stories there, and the endings are kind of gentle. Like I just, you know, or like, I don't know if you know this book, K-Fai, Speedboat,
Yeah, that's
you
great.
know, but like, they're just, yeah, there's just a weird kind of like, his ego is so not in there. There's just this weird way that he's just letting his characters kind of tell their story, and he's not like trying to wow you. There's never some sense of, you know, he's just, it's like if you're like a fly on the wall watching this story happen.
Oh, and George and Martha, where sometimes I was like, it's done? That's done? You know, and I'm just like so ready for the next one. Doug, what about you?
Oh, I feel like I feel like this is always a very difficult question, and I'm never prepared to answer it. That's how I feel now. I feel like the drawings that I think about now, or that I feel a lot of a connection to, are like Bill Pete was a big one for me, you know, just in terms of enjoying the storytelling and the drawing. And there's the ones that were like, you could really, there's immediacy to the drawing, or there's immediacy to the line. So like Bill Pete or Garth Williams, you know, all of that scratchy line work. I feel like that I kind of have carried that with me, whether I have meant to or not, you know, and how I draw now. But just that to me, it really made the images feel alive in a great way, and because of that, I think they've always stuck with me.
I think it's so important, everything that you're all saying, the idea that we have to study the books of the past. You can't be a really great picture book maker if you haven't read and enjoyed and treasured picture books of past, present, you know, past and present, actually. And so I love that. I also love this thread that comes through with everything you're all saying, which is that basically bookmaking is not a linear process, because I think so often we lie to children and we act like drawing or writing is a linear process. Sit down, write your first line, draw your first picture, and then it's all going to come together. And it's just so not linear. I'm kind of curious about something, and that is that if, as you think about and as you're creating your books and other things, I heard Chris Roshka say yesterday, and I've heard him say this before, that every week he goes and spends an hour at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, no matter like what he's doing. Like it's this protected hour from him, which by the way, sounds like a dream to me, you know, it just sounds like a dream. And so I'm wondering, like, what would you do with your protected hour, or where would you go, or what do you want to see that may or may not be available, or maybe we need to try to get it available?
I think I would just be, I really want to be outside. I think I would try to you know, maybe because I haven't done that enough recently, because I've been finishing some projects, which I'm very lucky to have, but I'm ready to kind of refill and get out and yeah, maybe just exactly. I think getting outside for me, for some reason, and drawing, like drawing on location, whether it's drawing in the park or whatever. I think that is always something I look forward to.
And you have a studio of people who love to do that. Always, always making me jealous. Always making me jealous as I'm like, wait a minute, you just saw that for 5 minutes and that's like this amazing thing that you have to share. So K-Fai or Rowboat?
I like to take my dog for a walk. I think like Doug, I feel like I don't get outside enough. I think I don't draw on my sketchbook enough. I feel like I go through phases where I draw on it regularly and then I don't. And I think that for me is where I end up having the most fun. That at some point, I don't know how K-Fi feels about this or Doug, but at some point making a book, once you've committed to the book and the fun of the idea that there's like a lot of not fun parts of it. I mean, it's a total privilege to get to work on a book, and there are moments of joy, but there's a lot of slogging and there's a lot of just worrying, and there's not a lot of there's like work and there's like discovery, but it doesn't feel playful a lot of the time. And like sketching, doing something totally unrelated to your work, and they are working with a different material, whether it's clay or Susannah, I know you do a lot of like crafting stuff, other materials, like textiles that, doing something else that just feels like play and that has no purpose. I feel like
Which is
that
one
is
of
like
the things that I love about your book making, that you take something that we don't even expect. I was looking for my my Mostly Marshmallows book. You take something that we don't expect and then you turn it into this just amazing world. And I just love everything. I just love everything about that. And how you see something that might be sitting on your desk and it becomes an item. I literally just want a rowboat. I want a miniature rowboat museum that I can just like shrink and live in for a little while. If I talk a little bit, you've had such an eclectic path to where you are now as a children's book creator. In working with kids, and I believe that actually you were like, weren't you a Daniel Handler and Lisa Brown fellow and all kinds of other things like that, and you just seem to have so much respect for bookmaking and other things. So talk a little bit about like where that comes from, or what you want to do with that, or where you would like to go when you come back from Switzerland.
I don't know if I want to come back.
Fair enough.
But it's going to have to happen. I mean, like, I think it's like eclectic because I always needed money and I was always trying to get by and like get different jobs and things like that. So it was like getting part-time work wherever I could. Sometimes that was at a library, like the Free Library of Philadelphia. Sometimes it was at museums. When I moved to New York after college, I had a job and then I was quickly fired from that job because I didn't know anything about being an administrative assistant, which was like the best. It was like such a gift for me to be fired. So merciful. But then I ended up, a friend who was working at an auction house, Phillips Auction House in New York, was like, hey, they're looking for art handlers. And I was like, I've never handled art before, but I can try. Learned how to install art, had a part-time job doing that. And then through another friend, got a temp job at MoMA actually. And then I was able to be an art handler there also part-time. But yeah, I mean, it was at a time where I would spend like, a day a week probably at the Met. That was my favorite museum in New York. But I think working at MoMA and just walking around the museum in the mornings. So, you wipe the puppy dog nose prints off of all the vitrines and you dust the artwork. I got to dust Picasso's guitar and to and like Starry Night. So here's like an insider tip with MoMA. All the most valuable art is next to the fire escapes because after 9/11, they just wanted to be able to get the art out really quickly if there was a disaster. So if anyone's planning some sort of heist, just know that you would have an easy exit. But yeah, it was mostly because I was like, just like piecing together jobs here and there. And I knew that I wanted to be involved in some sort of like a library or museum. And it was funny, like when I first started going to SBWI things, like the only books I had looked at were books from like the 90s and earlier, mostly from like the 80s and 70s. And I found that when I was making dummies, people were like, these dummies are so long, they're so wordy. But because I was only looking at books from like the 80s and the 70s, and where they were much longer, and they're like, why don't you go into a bookstore and look at like contemporary books? So yeah, I began doing that too. One thing that I kind of did want to talk about, that I spent a lot of time with at the collection at UConn, was the James Marshall audio lectures. Do any of you know about these? But I'll talk about them for the sake of the audience. So every year, James Marshall would go to this Professor Francella
Butler.
Yeah.
Butler. Yes, she was a short, loud, fierce children's book advocate.
And she would invite all of these incredible people like Carol Spinney, and I think didn't like
Maurice Sendak.
Maurice Sendak, but I feel like even like Bertolt Brecht went, like, but maybe not. All these people went and spoke to her, like like undergrads there.
Mm-hmm.
And James Marshall, since he lived up the street, would go once a year. And so there is literally a box of audio cassettes, which have now been archived and put on the UConn website. So you can listen to these digital 1 hour long lectures where he talks about his process. He reads a book. He answers. The Q&As are incredible because he talks about what his experience writing. And one thing he talks about a lot, which I was thinking like when Rowboat was talking, was he was talking about his process of just being like in the studio and being so unsure of like, am I going to be able to pull this book off? And just listening to him say this, like talk with all this doubt, he was like, my biggest fear is that, you're going to put the bucket down the well and the bucket's just going to come up dry. And he's like, and I'll just be in my studio and I'll like literally throw up in my studio thinking like, I'm all washed up. I can't think of another joke to save my life. I'm never going to finish this book. And you have all this money riding on it. And it was like the first time I'd heard someone who I, really admired. I really admired their work, talk about it in such a real way that was just so relevant, right, to the entire process. And I feel like oftentimes you don't hear people talk about really what it's like, oh, it's it's hard to come up with endings, or it's like you're always afraid that you're not going to be able to come up with a story because when you're invited to speak in front of a bunch of people, you're like, well, I guess I'm the expert here and I need to pretend like I'm an expert and know exactly what I'm doing, and there's really not any space for you to show your weakness or show like, I really don't know what I'm doing. I just kind of have this character that I keep on drawing and I hope a story comes along. Right.
There's so much about that I love. And if like, I wish everybody could see Jim Marshall's a little space in his attic in this little house. And he and Francella Butler actually lived 2 houses apart. There was only one house, well, as the crow flies, between his house and Francella Butler's house. So, it's in just a really small little hamlet down the road. But I love that whole idea of vulnerability. Speaking of vulnerability and other things like that, let's go back to some of the themes from today. This kind of like that. Is there a line between borrowing, stealing, musing, and looking? Like, how does that work? I know I've often heard children's book creators say in public audiences, I chose not to look at the other work in this area because I wanted it to be my own. And then other people who have been looking at Jessie Wilcox Smith and like so many people for years, and they would have go to wherever they could find anything. So what is that line? And we, of course, have the famous quote that often gets misquoted about stealing and borrowing and what good and great artists do. I'm still unsure about the origin of that quote, whether it was changed from T.S. Eliot or Stravinsky or others. I'm pretty sure it wasn't Stephen Jobs. But like, what about that? Like, Rowboat, will you talk a little bit about the people that you've studied? You're such an incredible reader of great children's books from past, present, and current.
I will say that for me, I feel like, I draw probably how I draw because of the books that I looked at when I was a kid and as a not such a young kid, and that some of those some of the influences were intentionally kind of adopted. I remember tracing Peanuts cards when I was little. And I remember my parents being furious that I was tracing Charles Schulz's characters, that I was trying to fob them off as my own, but I was really just tracing them because I couldn't figure out. I remember I couldn't get my line to look like his line, but it was because I was tracing it so slowly. So I was never getting any of the speed of his line, and I was never getting any of the feel. And over the years, I've realized, I think I spent so much time sort of waiting to develop a style or to start drawing like the person that I wanted to draw like. And then I realized, like, at some point, I've always just been drawing like me. I'm going to include, parts of other people's work that I like. And, in terms of borrowing, like, I certainly spend a lot of time looking at James Marshall and William Steig, Victoria Chess, people like that, that to kind of, like, overtly copy their work feels derivative, right? And I think that, but there's a period of time after which you've kind of digested somebody's work where you're no longer trying to do it, but it's just kind of percolated into who you are, that informs the way you're making pictures. And so part of it, for me, I'm kind of drifting away from whatever your question was, is like this weird dance between accepting yourself for the maker of the work that you make, looking at things to inform yourself and maybe evolve in ways that you can, but that at least as a person who's making books, you're not really encouraged by the people who hire you to make books to be reinventing yourself. Like, you're being hired to kind of make the work that they know you for. And I know Doug and I spend a lot of time talking about, oh, if only we had time, we would be doing this thing with like a giant brush or with just 2 colors, or we'll just do it all with silkscreen or potato prints, but you never have time to do it. But that, realizing that you make the work that you make, and that and being generous with yourself for realizing that you are probably the inadvertent collective theft of all of the work that you've looked at over your life that you like and don't like, and that, hopefully you continue to develop by continuing to inadvertently steal or intentionally steal from. I think just looking at stuff, it's all a kind of thievery, right? That's how you're informing your hand, your brain, the stories that are percolating in your head. So, I don't know, like I only know that for me, when I'm working on something at the moment, I really don't look at anybody else's work because it makes me so confused, and it reminds me of all the things that I can't do. And, that's not a healthy way. That's not a good place to be. It's not a good voice in my head. And, I need to be able to just engage with the me and the skill set that I have and the story at hand. So I try not to look at other people's stuff when I'm working on a book.
I love that so much. I'm just thinking, and Doug and K-Fai, I'd love for you to respond, but I recently had a conversation with Barbara McClintock, and she was talking about how, and any of you who met Barbara, heard her speak, know that she learned to draw by studying other artists and just copying everything. And every book that she does now, whether it's The 5 Forms that was influenced by Little Nemo and Winsor McKay and Husakai, all those things, like pieces that come together, and the role that Maurice Sendak played in her becoming an illustrator, just because he answered her phone call. Literally, like he literally picked up the phone, and what that is and how that does it. But Doug and K-Fai, what about you for this line, this very ambiguous line about creating something new that may be an homage to something of the past, or may have just come from one word? Elijah Cooper says his most recent book is a product of the ampersand that Barbara McClintock used in Adele and Simone, that he wanted to do a book that had an ampersand, just like that little teeny stimulus.
Ooh. Oh, I don't know. Rowboat, I thought that was great, everything you said. And I feel like, yeah, I just kind of have my own version of that, right? Where there's, I do agree, there's a good time to kind of like fill up, to take things in, or maybe, I feel like there are some days where I don't feel like drawing. Should I admit that? Maybe that's an awful thing to admit. But and then I know, like, okay, I've got to go to the museum. I've got to go look at something. I've got to get outside. I've got to go see some friends. You know, I've got to go to the library, go to Strand, and just walk around and pull some books off the shelf, or listen to some music, or see some dance, or some theater. Just something to kind of get things moving, you know. And then I feel like then I feel like, again, there's so many, I feel like I'm going off on a tangent, but, you know, usually, right, like the story you're trying to tell has a certain mood and emotion and feeling. And sometimes that tells me what I want to be looking at, you know. If there's something that's super lyrical or musical, you know, the quality, I want this quality of line that's really flowing, then, you know, that might direct me to what I kind of want to start taking in. But I think, yeah, I mean, right, that's the nature of humans, right, to imitate. And especially when we're little, like for me, I was a big Garfield reader, so I would draw Garfield. And then I was like, oh no, this is good drawing. You know, like where those books that are like how to draw a horse or how to draw animals, right? Where it takes you step by step. And then the last one is this like intense. Oh, I wish it was that fun. I had these books that were like, the books I had were like, you know, photorealistic pencil graphite, you know, like chin, 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 chin. And, you know, so yeah, so that was like for a while I thought, oh, this is, you know, how you're supposed to draw everything. And then, of course, you know, I've changed many times since then of what I think is how I want to draw. So, and it's ongoing, right? I hope it will continue to be ongoing. I feel like we all probably feel that way, right? It's like, okay, you know, this is what I can do for this book, right? And the next book, you know, I might have a chance to slightly, you know, I had a teacher, the chair of the program at SVA, Marshall Arisman, would remind us, you know, like, yeah, you want to evolve, but maybe just like change some small things in your process, you know, like don't just throw everything out and just do something completely different, you know, like try and make that evolution of how you're drawing or what you're looking at and incorporating, you know, kind of this gradual thing. And you might feel better about that change versus like something completely drastic.
I think that's so interesting. Only because Rowboat showed it. I want to tell everybody, if you don't know, there's going to be an Ed Emberley exhibit at the Carl Museum of Picture Book Art that's going to open. It opens very soon, and there'll be a talk that Caleb Nielsen is giving on December 19th. I think so many people, except for Doug apparently, so many people had those how to draw books and looked at the work of Caldecott award-winning Ed Emberley and the various ways that he would take and break an image down. The questions are starting to come into the chat, and as much as I would like talk to you, all of you, about everything, as an illustrator, do you find the composition for a certain page? How many thumbnails does it take to find the one that you're looking for? Like literally, let's talk about process here and other things like that. And I'm hoping this is messy.
Yeah, I mean, it is a really messy process. I have something that I'm working on right now.
Oh, I love how you had to reach for it, K-Fi.
Yeah, it's like I have a shelf above my desk. This is a manuscript I'm working on. So this is what it looks like when I get a manuscript. I just print it out, and then I'll make a bunch of drawings on the actual manuscript, like this. And then when I am trying to thumbnail it out, I just use Post-its. So basically, like this is like what the first page is going to look like. Vacation, chapter 1. It's like I mean, it's like my thumbnails look like this. Like it's like, oh, I know that I want a bus to be going along a night road. So they're very, very messy. I think these are the things that I don't intend to post on Instagram. I'm not going to show these to anyone. And then this is actually another book I'm working on.
Okay, I want you to post them on Instagram.
Like they go from thumbnail to something a little more finished, and I will show this to an editor. Yeah, so I mean, you kind of know I kind of know like what something is going to look like just by reading the manuscript. Like I think I know it's going to look something like this. But the first thing I always do is I try to figure out who the character is, because you gotta meet them, right? And I think of like this initial part as like the casting call, right? To figure out who's gonna show up for your book.
I love that idea of the casting call.
Oh yeah, I mean, picture books are just theater, right? It's like, but you get to be like, didn't Maurice Sendak say this? Someone said this. You get to be the art director, or you get to be the camera person. You get to do sets. You get to do costume design. You get to do casting and directing and act, right?
Anybody else want to talk about their thumbnail process or their compositions?
No, you go. I was just going to say, for me, yeah, how do you find the composition for a certain page? If as many thumbnails as it takes, right? And that's why it's the thumbnails, because it's quick and messy and it's no stress. I'm starting a few new projects, and I'm just so happy to be starting, because it's the place where everything is possible, and I don't have to make any, I don't have to lock in anything yet. So, I'm teaching an illustration class right now, and when we are at the thumbnail stage for the prompts, I ask them to do at least 10 thumbnails, and some students
You're cruel. You're cruel. 10 thumbnail.
10. Some students they're like, they just look at me like, I hate you. And then, other students I turn around and they've already done 25, so and everyone gets, to a same point where they feel like they've got a great composition and they feel good with it. So in the end, you'll find your number, your balance of how it works for your process.
And I think there's no magic to the number, right? I mean,
right.
The truth is there's very little magic or formula to anything. But I love the Post-it idea, because the Post-it, I think, makes people feel that it's a little less threatening, and other things. Rowboat, what about you in your process and other things? I always imagine that I want to go through your waste paper can, and I just want to tell you, do not throw anything away.
Oh, you'd be very mistaken, Susannah. There's I'm actually my thumbnails are kind of terrible, because I think I'm not very good at seeing things without seeing them. So I watch Doug and I watch Sophie and Brian thumbnail things, and they're very loose, and they have some sense of what this little, very rough suggestion of something might mean. I have no idea what any of those little loose things might mean to me. I find myself having to make my thumbnails a little bit more realized, without becoming too committed to them, but I'm not very good at conceptualizing things without really seeing what's there. So I wish that they were looser, but they're not. And there's nothing worth finding in my wastebasket.
Hey, Doug, we have a question. Where are you teaching illustration? I believe I know the answer to this, but I don't want to make a mistake.
Oh, yeah. It's the School of Visual Arts here in New York City. And it's an undergraduate sophomore class, but if anybody is in New York, they have wonderful continuing ed classes, that obviously you don't need to be enrolled. They're pretty affordable, and they offer just a huge array, and I took a lot. I feel like when I moved to New York after school, I had a full-time job for a long time, and those taking some continuing ed classes kind of helped me get back into remembering oh yeah, this is what I want to go after and what I want to get back into. So I love continuing ed classes.
We don't have that much time, but I do want to throw out a couple of fun things, because I'm kind of curious. You've mentioned James Marshall and Maurice Sendak and a number of other people, but I'm curious if there was somebody who, living and or dead, that you really want to have an hour with and maybe share a drink or an appetizer with, who would that be? Like, who would that be?
I feel like, I mean, I feel like there's always like that lesson I feel like I've learned the hard way. It's like never meet your heroes because you're just going to be disappointed. But I would say for me it would be someone like Linda Berry, who I just think is so brilliant and wise. And I love the way that it's really changed the way that I think about drawings too. It's something that we had mentioned earlier. It's like those learn to draw books where you're like, I want to draw a horse and it's going to look like a capital H horse. And she talks about that being like this moment where when you're younger and you're drawing, it's about an active space that you're playing in. And when you hit a certain age, when that age is that you want to draw a capital H horse, you're like, no, I want to draw a thing that becomes a finished thing. And how those two approaches are just so different. Like one is about play and immersing yourself in this world, which is kind of like the sketchbook idea that Rowboat had talked about. And the other is about like finishing a finished product that you could like sign and date and sell, maybe, right? But I would love to have lunch or dinner or a drink with Linda Berry.
Love that. Doug, a Rowboat? Anybody on your wish list who cannot be living in your studio? That's not fair.
Meeting new people, so I would probably just silently, awkwardly sit there. But I love Victoria Chess. I love her drawings. As long if I didn't have to talk to her, if I could just go and sit in her place. I don't even know if she's alive still, but I love just her pictures. It seemed like she was just making things to please herself. They're all kind of creepy and a little bit homely, but kind of exquisite. And I totally admire just her kind of commitment to making things that seem to be for her. And I think kids like that too. But I would say her. That's the first person that comes to mind.
I totally agree. I never knew Victoria Chess, but that would be super, super cool. And I wish today's people knew Victoria Chess' work as well. Doug, what about you?
Good question. I'm trying to think while everyone else is giving their wonderful answers. I probably, one of many would be Trina Shard-Hyman, who, a lot of the books I grew up with were the books my mom wanted to read to us, so she was one that we read. There you go. We were big into those fairy tales, and I feel like both for my sister and I, the way that we drew, we definitely copied the way she drew her people. And she was good friends with Tommy DePaula. And yeah, I would have loved to meet her.
She was an amazing soul. By the way, I think Victoria Chess is still alive and living in Connecticut. So this is going to be my holiday track down and other things like that. Totally excited about that. I know we are running on time. I want to just see if there's anything. Here's a question that has been asked. When do you start to think about color? And color, of course, might have been influenced by the books that you've studied and other things like that. But when do you start thinking about color in your process?
I feel like I should mute my...
Why are you guys all giggling? Why are you...
The bane of our existence, right?
I was going to say, I never think about color. I never do.
It's the scariest part of the book is when you have to realize, oh no, I have to color all of this stuff now that... I don't know. I try not to think about it. It's too scary.
Yeah, and it's a lot of pressure too. It's I don't know, it just becomes what it.
Oh my God, people are really happy. They feel relieved that you guys are that you great book creators are saying that. There's a sense of relief. I think in thinking about that. And
can I ask a question?
Of course.
I'm kind of curious because we kind of talked a little bit about this, but what are your hobbies or interests outside of making books? And do you feel it's important to have a hobby or an interest outside of what you do for a job? Because our jobs are so about being creative and, doing the fun stuff. Do you keep something for yourselves is what I'm asking. And what is it?
Rowboat, go.
I mean, I think it's what is it? Just playing with objects that are lying around the house. I know when K-Fai, when you were talking with the kids about Ozzy and just like the materials around the house and the kind of the idea of like accentuating that the stuff that you're using is not any sort of special material. Like, you know, I find in like the fall, I go out and I collect acorns. You know, I like to make little acorn people. I love to have construction paper around because it's totally not precious. I make little empty books out of, you know, colored construction paper. I make things out of Sculpey. I use my dog's hair to make wool beads. I mean,
Ruby.
so, you know, it's for me, it's like it's all the things I think I did when I was a kid, just playing with materials. I don't know if it's really a hobby as much as it's just taking the junk that I find and playing with it. I play, maybe, is that a fair hobby? Like, and gardening. I mean, you know, if I was more organized, I would carve out more time. I know that that's something that Doug does. But you know, anyway.
Yeah. That's just to hop on there. That I haven't recently have kind of fallen off, but for a good stretch, and I'll get back into it. There's a park nearby in New York that I'm a volunteer gardener at, and I love doing that just for me. Yeah.
K-Fai, what about you?
Before I had a baby, we hiked a lot. I lived in San Francisco. It was just about like hiking and walking. And I would always keep a sketchbook in my bag that I would never open and never, but it was one of those things where it's like you always I think as picture book makers, you always feel this kind of like pressure and guilt if you're not working on something, or if you're not working on something towards the end, I don't know, what am I trying to say? You were not working on something that's going to be a picture book. If it's just something that's like, this is just for you, this is nothing to do with like anything you're going to share on social media. It's really for your own pleasure. And for me, it just ended up being hiking. And then also a couple of years ago, I got into finding like natural pigments. And again, it's like, I'm never going to make a book probably about natural pigments, but it was just something about finding these things and like finding like raw material that would be used to make a cave painting or something like that. So yeah, stuff like that.
I don't know. I think all the things that you do probably will and do creep into your picture books and other things like that. And I think that's the big part of it being a non-linear process, that there's so many different ways, whether it's visiting archives or museums or cooking or gardening or this natural pigments things. I'm just starting. I've just been playing with beets and other root vegetables to make dye because I'm a big fabric person and I couldn't get the colors that I wanted. So I'm trying. So I love that in every way. I know we're just about out of time, and Erica's probably going to kick us off, but I just want to say thank you to all three of you. I want to just like make sure everybody knows that there are previous books and forthcoming books come out. I know, K-Fai, you're pretty good on social media, and I know that Doug and Rowboat avoided a little bit. But you can still Google them, or DuckDuckGo, as I like to say them, because I'm a big DuckDuckGo fan for searches and other things. But K-Fai does a great job of keeping up on Instagram and Twitter and other things. And I just want everybody to just enjoy their holiday season, no matter how or with whom or what you do in terms of it, celebrating it. I know that some of us are ready for 2021 to maybe transition with a couple of positive ways and other things like that. So we're looking for a little bit of positivity. I want to thank everybody for joining us, and Stimula Live for sponsoring and like putting this together so that we could talk. And I feel like this is the beginning of conversations that I hope will last a lifetime.
Can I add one more thing too?
Absolutely.
Because we talked about archives, but I think accessing these archives is a really opaque process. And I just wanted everyone to know that, especially at places like at UConn and at the Curlin, where so many incredible things are, you don't need to be an academic to access these places. They're open to the public. So anyone can go. You don't even need to have published a picture book. You can just have an interest. I would really encourage people to do that. And also at your local library, the Free Library of Philadelphia is a place that has a really wonderful children's literature collection. The San Francisco Public Library, it's not so much an archive, but if you live near a major city, they probably have like some very special books that you might not know about.
Or even small, the Concord Public Library, which has all the YS and other things like that you can go in and access. And I'm going to add to that a little bit. Many people might not know there are even fellowships that will help pay your travel expenses if you are working on a book or an idea, or you want to study, whether it's at the Curlin, the DeGrumman, the Northeast Children's Literature Collection at UConn, and other things. So there are ways for you to get access. And even though many of them are under COVID protocols right now, you can also request and digital items. Specifically, if you use the finding aids and you know that there's something you want to see, you can often request a digital. And although there may be limited staff right now in some of those places, I know you can request a digital. And last but not least, I want to just remind you that the Library of Congress, which is our free library, has so much stuff in it that you could wander in and out of all of the items that are there and available. And it's just a really fun place. So really, I don't think we ever get away from the past informing the present and the future. And I'm hoping we don't. And I love the fact that all three of you and are so in love with people who've been creating children's books for a really long time. And I just think there is so much value. So the last thing I'm going to end with is I've been thinking a lot about literary lineages. I was lucky enough to have met Bemelmans and live across the street from Barbara Cooney and know Trina Shart Hyman and, get to hear Arnold Lobel. And of course, Margaret Weiss Brown was gone long before I was born, actually. But what is your literary lineage, and what are the books that have that you would want on your shelves forever that you go back to, and other things like that? So I think I can't believe Erica hasn't kicked us off yet.
I'm here. It was a wonderful note to end on. Everybody's energy is infectious, and I could listen to you all speak all night long, but I know just this hour, it will probably do some of you in for the rest of the year. So I'm incredibly grateful to you again for your time. And I thank everybody who joined us. And I want to remind you that on stimulalive.com, there are many wonderful conversations and events that you can still peruse. They're all up on our YouTube channel, which you can get to through Stimula Live. And we will continue to have more events in the future. So if there's something specific that you would love to hear about, please, or somebody you'd love to hear from, please let us know. Rowboat and Ruby, Susannah, Doug, and K-Fai, thank you for being here. And I hope everybody has a wonderful holiday season and a happy new year. And I look forward to seeing you in person. K-Fai may be a little further away than other people, but there will come that time that you come visit. I know it to be true. So I'm going to ask you all to stay on for one moment after I say goodbye to everybody else. Everybody have a great rest of your day. It's Friday. Go enjoy the weekend, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.